Good afternoon. My name is Claire Miller, and on behalf of the Friends of the Johns Hopkins University Libraries, I am delighted to welcome you to this month's Lunch with the Libraries, our ongoing speaker series that spotlights the unique collections, pioneering initiatives, and outstanding staff of the Sheridan Libraries. We are grateful for the partnership of our co-sponsors, the Johns Hopkins Office of Alumni Relations, Lifelong Learning, for their support in making the Lunch with the Library series possible. We are happy that so many people are joining us today for this virtual discussion. Recollections of the Children's Experimental Theater with Carey, Hodson Curator of the University Archives. To learn more about the history of this unique program, the scrapbook that preserves its story, and the serendipitous ways in which the libraries receive donations to the university archives. Following the presentation, I encourage you to ask questions of our speaker in the chat. We will do our best to respond to as many questions as we can in the time that is available. Formed in 1931, the Friends of the Johns Hopkins University Libraries is the oldest university library support groups in the United States. We provide financial support and advocacy for the Sheridan Libraries and organizing events like this one to bring members of the campus and the wider community to the libraries. The Friends includes people like you, alumni, faculty, staff, students, parents, and community members. I encourage you to join us, if you are not already a friend, to help ensure that the libraries remain one of the university's strongest assets, the heart of the intellectual life at Hopkins. Thank you, Katie, for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Claire for the introduction and to Heidi for the intro as well. So I'd like to start with how we came into possession of this scrapbook, and then we'll get into the history of the Children's Experimental Theater. So university archives, by definition, document the activities of an institution over time. And the historical record that's created is mostly made up of internal documents from across the university. And these come to the archives by way of our records management program. But in order to create a record that includes multiple perspectives, not just the perspective of the administration, we solicit donations of material from student organizations, from retiring faculty, alumni, staff, etc. We work really well with student orgs, and we're pretty successful with retiring faculty. But as you can imagine, this is kind of hit or miss because unlike with records management, these folks don't have any obligation to transfer materials to the archives. But sometimes we get lucky and folks contact us. So in September 2022, I was contacted by a woman in the UK, and she wrote to me that her mother had recently passed away, and as she was going through her things, she found this scrapbook that seemed to have a connection to Hopkins. She said that her mother, Claire Ash, had been a childhood participant and later an assistant with the program, and would Hopkins like this scrapbook for the university archives? These are a few of the photos that she sent. I could tell it was huge, and I could tell by some of the clippings that there was definitely a connection to Hopkins. And so I started to look in the archives to see what we already had about this, and I didn't find much. I found 8 photographs and a couple of articles in JHU publications, as well as some mention of CET in the records of the play shop and the Homewood Theater. But besides the photographs, we had no primary source material documenting the activities of this program. But I could tell that the scrapbook contained a wealth of information and would be a good addition to the collection. So Ms. Ash shipped the scrapbook to us along with the audio tapes of the founder speaking about her early life, and also a VHS tape with a short interview with the founder. So I started my research into this by listening to that taped interview with the founder of the Children's Experimental Theater, Isabel Berger. And I'll give you a little bit of her background and then an overview of the history of the program. And again, this won't be an exhaustive history of it, but just what I learned by reading the scrapbook and doing a little bit of research as well. So Isabel Berger was born Charlotte Isabel Blogg in Baltimore in 1902, and she actually spent most of her childhood right here in Charles Village on Calvert Street at 26th. She says in her interview that her journey with theater work began when she was at summer camp, actually. She tells the story of her first sleepaway summer camp experience at age 13, and she says she was terribly homesick, she had a horrible attitude, she didn't participate, and she just wanted to go home. And one day, a counselor named Ms. Elcock took her to the side and told her that when she went to bed that night, she should set an intention that the next day she would try to say something helpful or cheerful to her campmates as she went from activity to activity. Isabel said that she tried this and it helped. She ended up making friends and having a wonderful time at camp. And in fact, she even won the award for Best Camp Spirit that year, which was 1916. Later, as an older teenager, Isabel became a counselor at this camp herself. And one summer, this same counselor, Miss Elcock, asked her to help with a group of homesick girls at the camp. She had the idea for the girls to create little skits and act them out. She says that she thought by having the girls pretend to be someone else, they'd be able to let go of themselves and reach out to others. This ended up being a successful technique and one that was used in subsequent summers. Berger attended the Bryn Mawr School here in Baltimore and then graduated and went to Bryn Mawr College for 1 year before coming back to Baltimore and transferring to Hopkins. She had wanted to be in Baltimore to be closer to her future husband, Terry Berger, who graduated from Hopkins Medical School the same year she graduated with her bachelor's degree. They also got married that same year, so 1924, a big year for them. And they had 2 children and lived around the country for her husband's various residencies before returning to Baltimore in 1927. And this is where she made an interesting comment in the interview, but didn't elaborate. And she says that her mother offered to care for her children so that she could pursue her interests and her career. And so she applied to Hopkins again for a graduate program in Greek. And actually, you can see her application as well as her acceptance note here on the slide. But she didn't end up completing her degree. Instead, she went and took a job with her same old counselor, Ms. Elcock, who was now teaching at Greenwood School in Ruxton, Maryland. It was a boarding school, and Elcock thought that drama classes would help the students adapt to life away from home on campus. Berger taught there for 10 years and took a sabbatical and attended creative writing courses at the Hopkins Education Department. But after her first semester, Florence Bamberger, the director of the education department, asked her to stay and teach a course for teachers on creative drama in education. So Isabel agreed to do so, and the first iteration of Dramatics for School and Community was taught at Hopkins in 1940. She wanted to include children in the course as well to be a sort of lab for teachers. She thought that not only was this the best way to learn by doing, but she also didn't think that she could really demonstrate her techniques well otherwise. She makes an interesting comment in her interview. She says, Hopkins has this superior intellectual attitude, and there was a lot of trouble getting them to agree to allow kids on campus, even though class was a Saturday morning. But they did end up letting kids on campus, and she contacted the superintendent to recruit children from local schools to participate in the program. By the next year, the course was expanded to include what they named the Children's Educational Theater. Children would continue to participate in the theater training classes, but there were courses for children on offer as well. And they would use the barn pictured here along with the Hopkins Play Shop. And you can see the little sign above the trio of people here. It says Play Shop and Children's Educational Theater, and that's just a sign on the barn. So let's take a look at some pages of the scrapbook from the early years of CET at Hopkins. The scrapbook is 261 pages long, so we won't be able to show it all, but I'd like to show you some examples of the types of things that are included. So these are some of the very early programs, 1941. There's lots of comments about where they got things. So this says that they had public school art classes, make programs for them. They have all the little tickets and a little membership card. The scrapbook also contains lots of sketches. So this one is of lighting design, and at the bottom it says that it's a light plot by Dick Kurtz, who was an undergraduate at Hopkins, which I didn't realize that undergraduates participated in CET as well, so that was cool to learn. Lots and lots of photographs. Here you can see them performing on the steps of Gilman Hall. More photographs. Lots of sketches of programs and things like that, hand drawn, and also things like costume sketches that they would create. One thing I love, this is kind of jumping forward, but they did a Christmas Carol every year. Starting in that first season at Hopkins. And I just wanted to show that and their drawings of the stage for A Christmas Carol as well. So Berger refined her techniques and philosophy and teaching style during those first years at Hopkins, but her philosophy really did go back to that lesson that she learned at camp as a young person, that to find one's inner self, you must forget yourself. She called her technique creative dramatics, which she defined as the original expression of thought or feeling in the child's own terms through action or the spoken word. And she believed that this method would teach imagination, sensitivity, deepen human understanding, allow children to explore their emotions, and kind of create an ease of movement and an ease in oral, communication with their fellow peers as they go forward. So here's some photos of her with her in her classroom. She outlined her technique in a two-part essay for Players magazine in the late 40s, and she describes the way that she takes children from day one all the way through a production of a performance. She says that teachers should start with pantomime for day one because it's a natural outgrowth of play. And she would have the children act out various basic motions like picking flowers or eating ice cream. And you can see here, she says that they are rhythmically cutting grain, which is an exercise to free the tense body. And then in day two, you would add some emotion to the pantomime. So she gives some examples like a little girl is worried over a rip in her dress. A child is very happy with his new bicycle. And students would observe and offer commentary and constructive criticism as they watch their fellow students. And she emphasizes at this point that the teacher should not tell children how to move or how to act, but rather just offer feedback and response. Skipping forward, she has them produce a play and describes how you can have the students come up with the story themselves, as well as all the blocking and dialogue and costumes and everything. And her focus was really not on creating future theater professionals, professional actors, but really just on supporting a person's development through these techniques. Hence her motto for the experimental theater, which is play acting is a child's rehearsal for his role as a grown-up. I should mention too that everyone called her Dearie, which was her mother's nickname for her. She was one of these people that, kind of has a magical way with children. And I'll share what the woman who gave us the scrapbook shared about her mother. So she says that her mother, Claire, was largely brought up by her aunt in Massachusetts until the age of 10, when she returned to Baltimore to live with her mother and her very authoritarian stepfather. She found it really difficult to move back to Baltimore and felt like a fish out of water. And she ended up attending the theater workshop and found like an invaluable escape. In her late teens, she helped Isabel put on many productions. She called Isabel Dearie, as many of the kids did, and her husband, a pediatrician, was known as Doc, and they became second parents to my mother. So that is Claire's experience there. So unfortunately, after 1943, the university could no longer provide funds or facilities as the group kept expanding. So Isabel resigned, and with the intention, quote, of establishing a social agency dedicated to serving a growing urban community with a program of educational drama for children, teachers, and recreational group work agencies. And she called this the Children's Experimental Theater, and it was established in connection with the Vagabond Theater, which was then on West Reed Street in Baltimore. The goal would be the same as the former Children's Educational Theater, which is to offer creative drama classes for children ages 8 to 18 and produce 4 plays a year, and also give courses for teachers of children's drama. This move also allowed CET to begin to be more involved in the wider community of Baltimore. And I'll say that the Children's Educational Theater at Hopkins did continue after Berger left, although I did read a few quotes in news clippings that it wasn't the same. But the latest listing that I could find in the course guide appears in 1953. So I'm not sure if it continued at Hopkins much longer past the 50s. They set up an extension service committee, which was in charge of creating partnerships with city organizations, with schools, churches, things like Girl Scouts, etc. And their activities consisted of giving lectures and workshops and at local organizations, again, at schools, and also at the Enoch Pratt Library, often with kids in tow so they could put on demonstrations. And they also gave free or sponsored performances to local groups. You can see examples of this extension throughout the scrapbook with the various organizations that they worked with. So a drama specialist who was a representative of the USO's National Program Division came to speak at a meeting and demo by the Children's Experimental Theater. And afterwards, she asked Miss Berger if her article, the one I mentioned it earlier, but she did write an article about her techniques, and the USO wanted her to have that reprinted and distributed by USO workers who worked with children of service members. So you can see that on the left there. And it's at this time that the publicity, the word of this program starts to spread. She published a book in 1950 called Creative Play Acting, which is actually still a text that's respected in the world of children's theater. People still use it. So throughout the late 40s and early 50s, Berger started lecturing and giving workshops across the country. Popularity in children's theater was growing in the country at this time, and she was seen as an expert. Then in, what year, 1950-ish, apologies. Youth leaders from West Germany visited Baltimore and invited her to partner with their educational exchange, which was part of the US State Department. And she went and gave workshops in 10 different German cities. And this led to a whole bunch more international work. There's too many things to list, but for instance, she was a delegate to the International Theater Association at The Hague and in Yugoslavia. She was on a panel at UNESCO, et cetera. And she started to get letters and, contacts from people around the world and across the country about her book and her workshops. I think it's important to note that though her program was so widespread, the opportunities for participation weren't. In theory, enrollment in the extension service programs of CET were open to all, but the population that the program served was overwhelmingly white. Berger did work with local theater organizations specifically geared for Black children, and she also worked with the Baltimore Interracial Fellowship to put on productions. But student membership in CET was not integrated until 1957, and audiences were also segregated at the beginning years of the program. The program was also not profitable. It relied a lot on volunteers to keep the program going. It relied a lot on older students who ended up creating a teen group within CET in order to help teach the younger kids. Deary stayed with the program until 1966 when she retired. Although during that time, she continued to travel and give workshops and published a few more books, all of these in the, instead of creative play for children, it was creative play for senior citizens, creative play for teens. She had a whole series of them. CET maintained a regular schedule of classes and performances until 1969 due to their budget, although it continued to be active until I think about 1996-ish, 90s, maybe 98. The most recent thing I could find about the organization that CET became, which is the Children's Theater Association, was from 2015. So the program did continue, but I couldn't tell what had happened to it, and I don't know how successful it was. Let's see. So thank you. This was a very brief history of the program, both kind of a piece of JHU history and a piece of Baltimore community history. Our next steps here in the archives are to do a preservation level scan of the scrapbook, to write up more of what I've written in the finding aid. And I'd also love to have someone do a project on the history of theater at Hopkins. And yeah, that is it. I'd love to hear some questions so I can talk more about parts of this scrapbook.
Thank you, Katie, so much for such a fascinating presentation. My name is Heidi Herr. I'm the librarian for English, philosophy, the writing seminars, and special collections student engagement at Johns Hopkins. It is my pleasure to open the Q&A portion of the program, and we encourage you to ask questions in the Hopkins at Home Watch Now chat. And we'll do our absolute best to respond to as many questions as we can in the time that is available. And oh my goodness, the questions are coming in. Katie, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So we have a question from Cindy. So cute. Was this completely extracurricular for the children and for the JHU students helping to produce the plays?
So for the children, yes, it was completely extracurricular. It was not part of any school program. For the JHU students, if it was students in the education department, yes, they did help produce the plays as part of their schoolwork. But I'm not sure about the undergraduate students or other JHU students. Like we saw that an undergrad had that lighting plan. I'm not sure if that was integrated with a class or they were just students that worked with the theater.
Thank you. We now have a question from Erin. And Erin is curious, did the CET produce original works, and are there any existing play scripts?
They did produce original works. A lot of the works they did were kind of adaptations of popular plays, but Deary really believed in students creating their own stories. And so, yes, there were a bunch of original works that they performed. There are some excerpts of scripts in this scrapbook, but I have not found a extant, like, full script for anything.
And going along with that, you mentioned that the founder wrote a book that is still respected today. Do you know if the library has any copies of that?
You know what? That would have been a good thing to look up before this, but I did not look. If we don't, we should get it. It's still available. I saw it online.
Oh, we're Hopkins. I'm sure we can obtain a first edition. We're good with that. And we have a fun comment. Gabrielle dropped in a fun fact. The Vagabond Players in Baltimore started the play by H.L. Mencken.
That's right.
Yeah. Any other like references like Mencken or anything in the scrapbook?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
No.
And this is kind of cool. It turns out that we have a participant, someone watching right now, who is actually here. She was an actor in the CET. Her name's Adina, and she was here for the summers of 1951
so
through
cool.
53, 54, and she was in the big Snow Queen performance. Do you know off the top of
That's
your head
awesome.
if the scrapbook has any documentation on the Snow Queen?
I believe it does, yes. And I wish I could cut out of my presentation to go find one, but maybe I can send you photos later. I do remember there's a Snow Queen page in here.
That sounds so cool. And I mean, it sounds like the scrapbook is fascinating, that every single page has something remarkable upon it. Is there anything in particular that turned out to be your favorite?
Honestly, in general, my favorite are and I don't know if you can see this now, or is all the ephemera that's included, the little tickets and the hand-drawn playbills and things like that. Those are the types of things that really don't get saved very often. And to have them here, I just love to be able to see all those little pieces of that.
And you mentioned earlier that they performed A Christmas Carol several times. Did you notice if there were any other plays that were very popular that they would repeat?
Mm, I know they did Joan of Arc a couple times. They did. You know what? From what I saw, none as many times as A Christmas Carol, although they did repeat. They did repeat performances. Yeah.
Oh, and a few more questions have just come in. I'm telling you, this is a popular subject. So Meg asked, will community members, like those with no formal affiliation to Hopkins but are interested in local theater, will they have an opportunity to look at and see this delightful scrapbook?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of our collections are open to the public, and you would just have to request the box and you can come and take a look at it in our reading room. And like I said, we're also going to be making a high quality scan, and hopefully that will be available online as well eventually.
That's really great. Do you have any like how would you be publishing or promoting the availability of this? Like through blog posts, social
I
media?
don't know yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably a blog post or something like that. Yeah.
Would it be okay if anyone who would be interested in seeing this, if they were to email you or the Special Collections
Oh yeah.
Department, they can
Yeah,
update?
absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and email and ask questions. That's no problem. Yeah.
Oh, and we have a question from Roxanne. She would love to know if there were any musical elements to the plays.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you for asking that, actually. Yes, music was a big part of the plays, and a big part of the actual like teaching classes that she did. You can see in some of the pictures that have a classroom scene. Oh, geez. This one. Yeah, there's a woman in the background playing the piano. It was important to Berger to have music as a part of both the classes and obviously the performances as well.
It's really neat. So, Erin has another question. Is there a sense as to who the audience was for these performances at Hopkins, like families and also the local community? It makes Erin think of the tremendous community interest through Theater Hopkins, which continued at the barn.
Yeah, I don't know actually. There wasn't a lot of indication of who the people were who attended the performances. I mean, I would assume it's, the family members of the children and other community members. But I am not sure. I know they advertised performances in the newspaper. So in theory, it could be anybody that saw the advertisement, but I'm not sure.
And were the performances free?
No, some were free. They did some free performances, but usually there was a small fee for the performances. I think, let's see, one of these tickets has a price on it. Yeah, 20 cents for children. That's from 1941 though.
Oh, and we have another comment also from Gabrielle. Probably not something you can know from the scrapbook, but it would be interesting to know if early CET relied in any way on the County School for Boys at the Homewood House, which eventually turned into the Gilman School.
Right. Yeah, you know what? I don't know at all. And that's something that I kind of enjoy about this scrapbook is that, we got this scrapbook full of history that we didn't really realize we were kind of missing. And then when you take a look at it and see how many hundreds and probably thousands and thousands of children were involved, there's so many other places where there will be stories and information about this program. So I don't know, but it would be really interesting to take a look to see if Gilman or anyone else has materials related to the program.
Just from looking at this one slide, you see all types of, ephemera, and it looks like some of the pamphlets are stapled. I'm assuming a lot of these things are pasted in or maybe taped in. Are there any major conservation challenges you foresee with making this item available to the public?
Yeah, I think there really are. And let me see. The pages are quite brittle. One second. And because the photographs are glued, it's hard to, I don't know. You can't take them off and scan them. Some of the photos have like glue on them. Things like that. So I think just a lot of care taken when we're scanning it, and probably going forward, once that's done, that will be our preferred method of interaction with the scrapbook is, digitally, so that more damage doesn't come to it.
Just again, looking at the Joan of Arc program, like it probably will take a lot of time and a lot of care to fully scan it because you'd have to open up each page very carefully and assess to make sure that it's in good enough condition. Yeah. Oh, and we do have someone else with a question about the scrapbook. Sam wants to know if the scrapbook is in good enough condition and easy to page through, even with such old adhesives.
Yeah, it was actually really easy to flip through. I had to be really careful because, like I said, they were brittle, but it was secure enough that everything was okay. Nothing really fell out or anything like that.
So thinking about the future of the scrapbook and kind of ways to kind of showcase it and to conduct further research, have there been any talks, for instance, about maybe trying to do oral histories with people who were participants in these performances?
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that is a possibility and that I'd like to do. We don't have plans for it yet, but it's definitely, like I said, definitely something that we'd like to do to get more information about it.
And just to go back, how many pages did you say the scrapbook is? It sounded incredibly big.
Yeah, it's 261 pages. And maybe what I'll do is kind of flip back and we can look. I went through kind of quickly some of them. We can flip through here. Yeah, 261 pages. They all kind of look like this. with playbills and tickets and, you know, handwritten commentary on them. You can see too in these, maybe not this one, like this one is pasted in here and it's crumbling on the edges. You can see the edges here are kind of crumbling, some of that preservation stuff.
So just like looking at, again, at these photos, this is all just so remarkable. And since a lot of these things date to the war years, did you notice if any of the content was, you know, kind of part of like a patriotic duty to, you know, kind of support America's greater cause in the world?
I know that it was definitely, you know, kind of in the air, so to speak, in terms of, you know, the focus on children and having activities for them and volunteering. I didn't see anything explicitly that was about either the war effort or about patriotism, although you can see this one here, Liberty's Children, you know, has an American flag up here, and it's all about all the different children in America, I think. So there was definitely some aspects to that we can see just looking at it, but I'm not sure how deep that was though.
And since you, of course, are the expert on the content of the scrapbook, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Going through these pages, were there any plays when you were like, what were they thinking? This is wild. I can't imagine that you have to have children stage this particular play. Did any play surprise you?
No, nothing really surprised me that much. No, there was no, and everything was kind of like adapted for children. So for instance, this one, like, why is a button-nosed tortoise? Apparently this is a telling of Aladdin and the lamp, but for children. Again, I don't know the story, but there was a lot of kind of adaptation like that. I know that the older children's group, they called themselves the Sunday Nighters because all the older teens practiced on Sunday nights. They did some more serious plays, but there wasn't as much information about that in this scrapbook.
And I really love that the Sunday Nighters, like I love hearing about these like kind of like these like social, this little like social history, these little micro histories about how all of these like people like interacted with each other. Going to the scrapbook, are there any other indications like were there any like restaurants where all the kids would go to after performance, like anything like that that gives us a sense as to how the students interacted with each other?
Not so much about that. I know they had like a cast party at the end of the year every year, but there wasn't too much. No, not too much about that actually.
And
Yeah.
was the cast party, to best of your knowledge, at Hopkins, or was it someplace else?
Yeah, during those early years when they were based at Hopkins, it was. But in later years, I'm not sure. They were at the Vagabond Theater for a number of years, and then I think in the early 60s they purchased their own building.
Oh, and we have another question. Are you ready for it, Katie?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So this is from Joe. Do you know if the JHU School of Education utilizes theater and acting as educational tools?
I do not know, and that is a good question. And that's one of those things that I'd love to learn, because it could really show, you know, the impact of this program on kind of the academic tradition here at Hopkins. So it's definitely something I'd like to look into.
And we have another question. I'm telling you, you hit the gold mine with the scrapbook.
Yeah.
Sally would like to know, can you read some examples of what is written in the margins near the photos?
Sure.
Describing.
Yeah, so maybe this one. It has the names of the children, and then it has just a description of the scene. So this one is the ship comes in, or came low, excuse me. BOX spells trouble. Play by Claire Bob, which I'm wondering if that is Claire Ash. I wasn't able to find her maiden name. That might be her. Four's a crowd, all the names of the students. There's other commentary on let's see. This one is Ali takes leave of Silver Bud. The spirit of the lamp appears. I can't read those. It's kind of hard to read when it's on the screen, but mostly just descriptions of what's happening in the photos. So for, like we saw with this, rhythmically cutting grain, exercise for the tense body. And it says these pages include pictures of classroom exercises and informal work on a production, 1944.
You may have addressed this during your presentation, but do you have a sense as to how many productions they would do in a given year? Would it be like one a semester or what?
It was multiple, yeah. Originally, for children's educational theater and children's experimental theater, the goal was 4 shows per year. But I know that that lessened in the later years, but about that many, yeah, 4.
So this scrapbook is clearly amazing. Is there anything else you would like the world to know about it? Any final thoughts about the scrapbook and the history it contains?
I don't know necessarily like something to know about it. I just, I really like using something like this, a real micro history, in order to tell, you know, a wider story. And it was really interesting to me to start researching, just to say, I am not a theater person. I don't know theater history. You know, I'm relatively new to Baltimore. I don't know Baltimore theater history, but it was really fun to start to look at Baltimore theater history and theater history in the US and see the development of children's theater, and see the development of what was called the Little Theater movement starting in the late 19th century, going forward, of which the Vagabond Theater is kind of Baltimore's answer to the Little Theater movement. And of course, CET was involved with them. So you can see that there's all these connections to make, and a wider story, historical story to tell, based on this little micro history here held in the scrapbook.
And someone had a very fun comment that, okay, we're going to go full on meta. I need to write a play about the CET and then get kids to perform that very play. Oh, yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah, looking to the future.
We'll use Isabel's instructions for how to, you know, develop a play with the kids.
Right, we'll get a first edition of that book, use it as our guide. We will like recreate the fashions. Like I have to say, I love that one photo of like the 3 women wearing their like jeans, like all relaxed.
I know, that's one of my favorite ones.
That's such a great photo.
Yeah, I'll go back. Yeah, especially because it shows the outside of the barn and the little sign too. Yeah.
Also too, it's just nice because so for those of you who might be interested, we do have some fashion magazines and special collections, like things like Vogue and like the predecessor to Marie Claire. And in the 1950s, it's really when you begin to see fashion spreads of women wearing denim. And I just like love this photo. It's from that era. And, you know, as a librarian, I love making these connections between materials we have in the archives that tell like history at Hopkins. And how they align with other materials, you know, just kind of showing these various cultural movements. This was such an incredible presentation, Katie, and thank you all so much, all of you in attendance, for asking such remarkable questions and sharing such great comments with us. And with that, we shall say adieu. A follow-up email will be shared with all of you that will include a recording of the program and a link to a schedule of upcoming virtual and in-person events on events.jhu.edu. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. You deserve it.
Thanks, Heidi. Thank you, everybody.